Okay, Bava Kamma daf tzadi gimel amud aleph. Do you guys have a source sheet?
Wow. Such a great.
You guys good? Okay.
Next time you feel that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so just for our ayah's sake, we're learning the Ein Yaakov, where we go through the Agadata of the Talmud. We stop at ones that we find interesting, and then we develop a shiur, and we usually compare what's in the Gemara to other versions of the Midrash, and look at the Mefrashim and try to develop an idea, and try to have a chidush at the end when something comes to mind. So this week we're going to be discussing, really it starts out with an idea about the importance of the power of our words to create and destroy. Right, there's this idea that Basara Ma'amarot Nivra Olam, the world was created through speech from Hashem, and in the Kabbalistic idea, or even Chassidut, right, the world is constantly created through the divine speech, and we also have a responsibility that our words can also have incredible power. And we'll see a few examples of the power of brachot and klalot that people make that's able to be mashpia in a way that wasn't anticipated. But really, the crux of the shiur is going to be about what we're told about Yitzchak Avinu, that he was blind in his old age, and we'll see that there's a lot of different examples of a lot of different explanations. Of why Yitzchak was blind in his old age, which is okay. Well, yes. Which happens to be this week's parasha, actually, the Mikra. So it works out nicely. It's in Yanei Diyoma about Vayiki Zaken Yitzchak Vatichena Einav Merot.
Last one? Yeah, last one.
This week's parasha. So Vatichena Einav Merot. Why did Yitzchak go blind? What was that for? So we'll see a few different reasons. And at the end, hold on one second. And then at the end, we'll try to kind of explain maybe something that's a bit mechudash in one of the midrashim. Okay. So the Gemara in Bava Kamma daf tzadi gimel amud aleph teaches as follows: V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak, le'olam al yitihi kilalat hediot kala be'einecha, she'era Avimelech kilal et sarav v'nitkayim bezar'a. So when a hediot here, it just means, even though we're seeing it's going to be about Avimelech, who was the Melech Gerar, but the curse of a person should not be trivial in your eyes. You should take it very seriously. Because Avimelech cursed Sarah Imenu, and that curse was fulfilled through her descendants. What does that mean?
Remember with the tzaddik, when we were talking about like the guy, the Rab, Jesus came to cure his kids, and then he said, if anyone was just as, I'd rather my kid will just die, and like 2 weeks later he actually died. Do you remember when we were talking about that? Moshe Yaakov created Rachel. Yeah, that's what it's not Jesus, but they mentioned his name about doing refuah and all this stuff.
Like months, weeks and weeks and weeks ago. Yes, that's true. Nachon. Very good. Yeah, that was Kishkagai Yotze Mipia Shalit. Right. That people unintentionally. Good. Thank you, Kobe. So then we learned about this idea that someone says something unintentionally that then is fulfilled, but it was by error. Here we're learning about someone deliberately says something and it's fulfilled. It's a little different, but you're right. We talked about that in a previous shiur. This time we're seeing the drasha here, Shnemar Hinei Hu Lach Ksut Einayim, right? After Avimelech, right, Avraham says Sarah is a sister, and there's a whole story Avimelech takes her, this and that. In the end, Avimelech, the people of Gerar are healed, right? Because all their wounds are stopped up, and then Avram prays for them, and then Avimelech gives Avram and Sarah all these gifts. So one of the gifts that he gives to Sarah is a ksut einayim, some kind of. Oh, great! What did you want to say?
What you just said.
Okay. Yofi. One of the gifts that Avimelech gives to Sarah is a ksut einayim, some kind of veil or some fashion garment, and it should be a covering for her eyes. But the drasha is Amar la ho'il v'kisit mimeni v'lo gilit shu ishech v'garamt li atzar hazeh yehi ratzon shiyu lach banim k'suyei einayim. That Avimelech, on the surface, he's giving all these gifts to Avram and Sarah to say, "Oh, thank you for praying and for reversing this thing." But it all really what Avimelech is hinting to is because you caused me all of this tzara by coming down and by not telling me the whole truth and creating all of this tzara. So ksut einayim, I'm giving this gift that covers your eyes, which is really a curse that you should have closed eyes because you hid things from me. And Sarah's son Yitzchak ends up going blind in his old age. So we see here this idea that the curse of Avimelech ends up being fulfilled through Yitzchak, who is not able to see. So, of course, the idea is to teach you the importance of taking klalot seriously, but the real chidush here is that Yitzchak's blindness, at least in this approach, had nothing to do with him. It was just a fulfillment of the curse that was placed on his parents. Okay? We see a kind of the other side of the coin in the Gemara and Megillah and Tedvav Amud Aleph. Okay? We're going to talk about it now, okay? V'amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Chanina, L'olam al tihi... Okay, 1 second. Okay, let me just read the quote, okay? Okay. לעולם אל תהי ברכת הדיוט קלה בעיניך, שהרי שני גדולי הדור בירכום שני הדיוטות, ונתקיימה בהן, ואלו הן דוד ודניאל. Okay, so the other side of the coin, also, if someone makes a bracha, you should take it seriously, right, for the good. What are two examples? There were two people who were blessed by two gdolei hador, two great people who were blessed by regular people, and the brachot came true. David דברכי ערבנה דכתיב ויאמר ערבנה אל המלך וגומר דניאל דברכי דריווש דכתיב אל האח די אן פלח לי בתרידה הוא ישיב זבינח. Right, so it's interesting he calls Daryavish here the Hediot, because Daryavish was the king of the empire of, right, he was the melech of the Madai, I think. But the idea is that Daryavish, he says to Daniel, when he's thrown into the pit of the lions, for example, right, the God that you pray to, he should save you, and it ends up he gets saved from the lions. So the idea is that even David and Daniel are also saved through a bracha that they received from somebody. So you should take brachot seriously as well. We see another quite striking example of this idea in the Gemara in Brachot. Tanya Amar Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. Pa'am achat nichnasti laktir ktoret lifnai v'lifnim. So Yishmael ben Elisha was the Kohen Gadol. V'ra'iti ach Teriel ya Hashem tzvakot.
Aaron was.
Yes, Aaron was the original Kohen Gadol, and then his descendants were also Kohen Gadol later on. Okay. V'ra'iti achat Teriel ya Hashem tzvakot shu yoshev al kisei ram v'nisa. Ve'amar li Yishmael beni barcheni. Okay, a pretty wild Gemara that Yishmael... Sorry?
Tanya. It's a song.
It's a famous song.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
See?
I didn't know that. Okay. So, I was out of the loop here. So, Hashem asks from the Kohen Gadol for a bracha. Amarti lo hi ratzon lefanecha sheyichbeshu rachamecha et ka'ascha. May your mercy overcome your anger. Right? Be merciful towards Bnei Israel. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu nodded his head in approval to say that he accepts this bracha that the Kohen Gadol gave him. What do we learn from here? This takes it way to the next level, that the Kohen Gadol, we would have said he was not a Hediot, but compared to Achat Uriel, Yah Hashem Tzavakot, he's as Hediot as it gets, and his bracha still takes effect when he blesses HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? So we see here this idea of Alti Kilalat Hediot Kala Beinecha, Alti Birkat Hediot Kala Beinecha. Now let's dive into the specific example, like I said before, about Yitzchak Avinu, and the fact that his blindness was because of the Kala. Yeah. Because I said let's dive in. He said there's no pool to dive into. Okay. Sha'al Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Okay, the Gemara in Megillah and Daf Kavchet Amud Aleph. Bama arachte yamim. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi goes to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha and says, "How did you live for such a long time?" Amar lo katzta b'chayai. So he said back to him, "What, are you upset that I've lived for so long?" By the way, this is actually also from this week's parasha. Katzti b'chayai mipnei b'not chet. Right? That's two references, so it's also Inyan Dioma. Okay, anyways. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says to Rabbi, "Are you upset that I lived for so long?" So Amar lo, Rabbi says back to him, "Rabbi, Torah hi v'lilmod ani tzarich." He says, "No, I'm asking because I want to know through what merit, through what zchut you lived for such a long time." So Amar lo, he said back to me, "Amai lo nistakalti b'dmut adam rasha." I never looked at the image of somebody who is wicked. That's why I've lived for so long. So Elisha has a meeting with Yoshaphat, who was the Melech Yehuda, and he was righteous, but also with the Melech Yisrael, who was wicked. And he said, I wouldn't even look at you, wicked king of Israel, if Yehoshaphat wasn't here. Okay, Rabbi Elazar Amar, Einaf kehot. So Rabbi Lazar says, no, if someone looks at someone who's wicked, he goes blind. His eyes become dim. How do we know? This is for our point. Shenemar v'iki zaken Yitzchak v'tichena einav mereot. That when Yitzchak was old, his eyes dimmed. So why did his eyes go dim? Mishum distakel be'esav harasha. Because Yitzchak used to look at Esav, who was wicked. And so anyone who looks at somebody who's wicked, his eyes go dim. Okay, so here we see a different reason from the one that was given, the Gemara Bava Kamma. And now the Gemara in Megillah asks, Veha Gramale, did Yitzchak go blind because he looked at Esav? Veha Amar Rabbi Yitzchak lo lamati kilatet yot kala be'enecha, she'avimelech kilat tzarav v'nikem zah, shnemar, hinei kilaksut einayim, v'tikaksut elaksiyat einayim. But don't we know that Yitzchak went blind because of the curse of Avimelech? So what are you telling me now? It's because he looked at Esav. So the Gemara answers, Ha veha gramale, which is a great answer. That really it was both of them, right? If it was just one and not the other, maybe it wouldn't have been enough.
Not an answer.
No, it's an answer. It says that both of these reasons are why he ended up going blind. We're going to extend that ha veha to another 7 reasons shortly. Okay, so a lot of different reasons combined in order to cause Yitzchak's blindness. Okay, and then the Gemara continues, and it just closes off the story. Rava Amar mehacha said pnei rasha lo tov. From this pasuk, I think it's Mishlei, that anyone who looks at the rasha, it's not good for him. And then just the Gemara ends off, V'shat p'tirato, when Rabbi Shua ben Kocha was about to die, Amar lo, so Rabbi said to him, Rabbi Barcheni, give me a bracha. So Amar lo, he said to him, Yehi ratzon shetagia lechatzi yamai. So Rabbi Shua ben Kocha said to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, my bracha to you is that you should live half as long as I lived. So l'chul hula.
How long did he
so
live
Rabbi, I think 120. I think. Rabbi Shua ben Kocha.
Spoke about it in one shear.
I'm not sure. We'll check it. We can check. We'll check.
Performs.
Okay. Ulchulhu, huh? So Rabbi says, what? You only want me to live for half of that? So Amar lo, ba'im acharecha behema yir'u. So Rabbi Shua ben Karcha says, if you live to be as long as I've lived, your life will be so productive. You'll be such a big gadol that your children will have no choice but to be shepherds, because you'll have left no room for them to make an impact on their own. So it's kind of this backhanded bracha that he gives him. Okay, good. So we've seen now 2 reasons why Yitzchak went blind. I want to expand on the reason that we just saw here in the Megillah and Daf Kafchet. Yistakel be'esav rasha. What if I look at a rasha, so I go blind when I'm old? Just by looking at them? I mean, what if he passes me in the street and I happen to glance at it, and that's enough?
No, shogeg no.
Sorry?
Shogeg lo.
Shogeg lo. Okay, good. So the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah and Perek
Well, you're
Samichei
not
says as
allowed
follows.
You're not allowed to look at them.
Just look at it.
So what does Yistakel b'rasha
I
mean?
was watching.
In what sense?
Basically, he didn't say anything.
Gazing at.
No, but gazing is also like.
See, he didn't say anything. He basically just said he'd be a Rasha.
I know.
Okay,
Like
so
it's a
Kobe's...
show.
But also,
Like you're looking at a show.
But also we can say the reason that the two, like the Klala shel Avimelech וביחד שהסתכל בעשיו הרשע together, it's kind of מגלגלים חובה על ידי חייו, לא? It's like maybe he had the Klala and just needed a reason to give him to be blind.
You're saying the Gemara in Megillah perhaps is also answering why Yitzchak should have been punished for having, because he didn't do anything.
He was looking at...
Also, so therefore you use Megillah. Good, very good, very good. That's good.
It's basically just said him be a Rasha without saying anything.
Okay, so that Yitzchak saw his Rasha and he didn't protest.
Also, Yitzchak saw Ishmael, so why specifically Esav?
Good, so we'll see. Good, yeah. Okay, so let's see. Bereshit Rabbah it says, Matzdik Rasha u'marshia tzadik to'avat Hashem gam shnehem. There's a pasuk that says, anyone who, I think this is also relevant to the situation on the national level, anyone who justifies or excuses or explains away evil, or anybody who says that what is good is actually bad, it is an abomination before Hashem. Right, and we see this in the world today, that depending on how you look at it, but that people are able to find things that are clearly evil and say why they're good, and vice versa. So that's a toivat Hashem, huh? Bagatz.
בלי פוליטיקה.
כן, בלי פוליטיקה, כן. חשבתי יותר על ה-ICC, אבל כאילו הבג"ץ הבינלאומי, איך קוראים לזה? ההאג, כן. בג"ץ, בסדר. אמר רבי יהושע בן לוי, לא ממה שהייתה רבקה אוהבת את יעקב, יותר מעשיו עשתה את הדבר הזה. So Rivka didn't play this whole trick in this week's parasha of, telling Yaakov to do the whole thing with the fur on the hand and this and that. It wasn't because she loved Yaakov more. which is interesting because the pasuk says explicitly, "Rivka ohevet et Yaakov," but it's saying that's not what motivated her. What motivated her is Ela amra lo ye'ol v'yet'eh be'ahu saba, that she didn't want Yitzchak to make a mistake and be led astray by Esav. Al shem toavat Hashem gam shnehem, because she knew that that Yitzchak was justifying or letting slide Esav's wickedness. So this is similar to what Kobe was saying. It's similar to what Kobe was saying, that it's not just that Yitzchak looked at Esav, but it was that he explained away, either, you can interpret that either more generously or less generously. Either that he was just kind of not really looking at it the right way and was inadvertent about it, or that he actively was trying to convince himself that it wasn't a problem. Right? Yalkut Shimoni takes it one step further. Rabbi Yitzchak patach matzdikei rasha ekev shochad v'tzidkat tzadikim yasuru mimenu. Okay, so those who justify evil, that is the heel, I think this is what that means, of bribery. So what does that mean? Kol mi shenotel shochad bishvil tzdik et harasha. So when it says anyone who takes a bribe, and that bribe is in order to justify evil, ze Yitzchak. This was Yitzchak Avinu. What's the bribe that Yitzchak took?
Yeah, your dad's side, maybe.
Right. And as Yitzchak says, Tzuda litzayid. And there's other midrashim that say, Yitzchak, great, Esav came, he would say, oh, Abba, here, I got you this delicious food. And he buttered up his father. And Yitzchak was essentially allowing himself to be bribed so that he wouldn't see Esav's true colors. So these psukim Mishlei are very harsh against that.
How does that fit? Like, usually we say that Abraham's chesed, Yitzchak's din. And if his din, he wouldn't be able to take bribes. It doesn't work. So, like, I don't know. How do you kind of explain those two together?
So you could say one of the other 6 reasons for Yitzchak, which we'll see. But it's like saying Yaakov is emet, and according to the Pshat, he lied plenty. What that means that Yitzchak is din is a good question. I'm not sbut yeah, I think you're right.
You have to die in for your own children anyway, so...
There's no shochat because you can't be done.
Okay, and this idea is Yitzchak's not unique of going blind in his old age. Is there anyone else that we can think of who goes blind in their old age in Tanakh?
Wait. No.
So one example is Achia Shiloni. Do you know what that is? Okay, so I brought the psukim here. Achia Shiloni, right. Achia Shiloni is the one who anointed Yeravam ben Nevat, okay, who ended up being the first king of Malchut Israel. And there's a story told. I brought the psukim here. Vayetei chala Avia ben Yeravam. Okay, so Yeravam's son becomes sick. Right, Yeravam, he's appointed by Achia, and then he goes and becomes a big rasha. Right, he establishes Avodah Zarah in the northern kingdom, and he does a terrible. He's very wicked. So when he's older, his son gets sick. So he says to his wife, Kumina vishtanit velo yed'u ki at eshet Yeravam ve'alacht Shilo hine sham Achia navi hu diber alay lemelech al am hazeh. So Yeravam says, I don't know what to do. My son is sick. So he says to his wife, because he's clearly since had a falling out with Achia because of his what he's done. He's gone down the wrong path.
The king is saying that?
The king is saying that. So he says to his wife, disguise yourself, right? Dress up, go to Achia Shiloni, and don't pretend that you're not my wife, in order so that you can, because he's the one who anointed me, so I trust his judgment, and then inquire about what the story is with our son. Right? Bring him a gift, and he'll tell you what the story is with the son. First of all, just as an interesting side note, right? This story should remind us actually of the story in Bava Kamma where Avraham and Sarah go down. Avraham says to Sarah, right, disguise yourself in a way, right? Say that you're my sister. So Yeravam is saying to his wife, go to Achia Shiloni and disguise yourself. Don't say that you're my wife. Just like Sarah was not Avraham's wife. That's interesting in and of itself. So what happens? Vatas ken eshet Yeravam. So she listens to her husband. Vatakum vatelech Shilo. She goes. Vatavo beit Achia. Right? V'Achia lo yechol lirot ki kamu enav misevo. Okay, and Achia Shiloni was very old and he was blind. The continuation of the story, which I didn't bring, is that right before she comes, Hashem appears to him because he's a Navi and says to him, by the way, Eshet Yeravam is coming to you, and say so and so. And so when she walks in the door, he says, "Why are you disguising yourself? I know who you are. And by the way, your son's going to die because of all the wicked things that Yeravam did." But here we have an example of also someone else who's in his old age, he goes blind. So why does Achia Shiloni, who's a Navi, why does he go blind? So let me just Shmuel makes a similar argument. Mikan Amru,
Get blind.
not the king, Achia Shiloni, the Navi. Mikan Amru Chachamim, Kol mi shehu ma'amid ben Rasha, or Talmid Rasha, sof she'enav kehot. Anyone who has a wicked son or a wicked student goes blind in his old age. Ben Rasha Yitzchak, a wicked son from Yitzchak Avinu, Vayiki Zeken Yitzchak, that's what we saw already, because he raised Esav and turned a blind eye, or maybe even took bribes from him. Lama, Shemid Esav ben Rasha. Talmid Rasha, a wicked student, Mechia Shiloni. Ve'achiahu lo yachol lirot ki kamu einav misevo. Lama, Shemid Yeravam, Talmid Rasha. Right, he appointed Yeravam ben Nevat, which he was commanded to do, but the fact that Yeravam went down an evil path after that, Achia Shiloni held was accountable in some way and held some of the blame, which is why he went blind in his old age. Okay? So that's one additional way of understanding Yitzchak's blindness.
It also explains looking at Mishum Shistakel Berasha. These two midrashim are explaining not just to see them, but להצדיק את הרשע, to see him. Right? Yitzchak saw Esav as something good, so that's the what you're asking about.
Video. Right, exactly. Right, that if Esav becomes a Rasha, that Yitzchak is culpable in some way for that, right? Because he's his father.
I saw Rasha.
Oh, okay. Yes, I know. Yeah.
Mekotel.
Yeah. There was a mechaber. Anyways, yeah. Okay. Right. So yes, in other words, if Yitzchak has a wicked son, you say that there is some accountability for that. We're going to let it slide. Okay. Let's look at some other explanations for Yitzchak blindness. So if we look in the next midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, I think it's the pshat, to be honest, which is Amar b'chanina kol peulot u'machshavot sheparalta aleinu b'shvilenu. Right, every action or thought that Hashem does against us is for our own benefit. Lama kahu einav shetzchak? Why did Yitzchak go blind? Kedei sheyavo Yaakov yitol et habachot v'yikitz ken Yitzchak. In other words, the reason Yitzchak went blind was to orchestrate the events such that Yaakov would be able to steal the bachot. Because if Yitzchak could see him, then that whole story couldn't have unfolded. And so that's given in and of itself as the explanation for why he was blind. Okay? Let's look at Bereshit Rabbah, which gives an entirely other angle to why Yitzchak was blind. And probably many of us have heard this reason, but we're going to delve into it. Right? We said one explanation is it's because of a curse that was given before he was born. One explanation is because of how he related to Esav, his son. Right? But then there's a whole other event in Yitzchak's life that maybe would have caused Yitzchak to go blind, and that was the Akedah. Okay? So if you look in Bereshit Rabbah and Samechet, if you look where it says Davar Acher on the third line, Davar Acher, Mir'ot, right? Vatichena enav mir'ot, right? Yitzchak went blind, or his eyes dimmed from seeing. What does that mean? From seeing. Mikoach otariyah, from that sight that he had, or that vision or looking that he had. Shebeshah she'akad Avraham Avinu et beno al gabei mizbeach, when Yitzchak Avinu was on the altar, bach'u malachei hasharet, right? The angels cried. Hada udichtiv hen erelam tza'aku chutza. Nashrud ma'ot meinehem l'toch einav. The angels cried and their tears fell from heaven into Yitzchak Avinu's eyes. V'yu shumot b'toch einav, and it left an impression. V'kevan shehizkin kehu einav, so that when he got older, these angels' tears they weakened his eyes and led him to be dim in his old age. Hadahu dichtiv vayiki zeken Yitzchak. Okay, so what do you think this midrash is saying, like more broadly, the point that it's trying to make?
Yitzchak was okay. He didn't do anything wrong.
It doesn't seem from this they didn't do anything wrong, right?
Which is he didn't do anything wrong. It's like kind of a schut that he got because of the Akedah. They were crying about him. And
Like a trauma.
Right. That's how I understand it. I think you're right. The way I understand it is Chazal are saying Yitzchak did not emerge from the Akedah unscathed. Right? In other words, they're tying the fact that he goes blind in his old age to this idea that he carried the scars of the Akedah with him past the story.
also, it means that his eyes were wide open during the Akedah. He didn't close the eyes. It was basically just saying, I'm ready.
It also shows his
It
willingness.
was just
Good. That'll tie actually to what we'll say at the end. That point.
saying, you see them,
That he was a willing,
instead
right? He
of
was willing.
Just closing your eyes and
it's like this idea that people think Yitzchak was a boy who was 37 years old, right? The Midrash, that he was a willing participant in the Akedah. Yeah. Very good.
I think there's a whole separate subject on this, but it's interesting in light of that it wasn't his Nisai, like it wasn't his. It's always talked about as one of Avram's tests.
Right.
He's the one, like, you have all these things about him, which is interesting.
Yeah. We'll see. Yitzchak, in the Midrashim that we'll learn, he becomes more and more of a central part of Akedat Yitzchak. Right? In the Psukim, he's a kli almost for Abraham's Nisayon. But in these Midrashim, we'll see he becomes more and more his Nisayon, as it were. So it's a good point. Yeah. The next Midrash in Dvarim Rabbah is similar, but it's a bit next level. Yitzchak amar leMoshe, ani gadol mimcha. Okay, the context here is that each of the Avot comes and starts doing competition with Moshe Rabbeinu and saying, I'm better than you, and Moshe refutes all of them. So it's Yitzchak's turn. He says, Moshe, I'm better than you. Shepashateti et tzaveri al gabei hamizbeach. Right, I laid my neck willingly onto the Mizbeach. Ve'ra'iti et pnei Shechina. I saw the Shechina when I was there. Amar lo Moshe. And Moshe said, you think that's a big deal? Ani nitaleiti yoter mimcha. I'm greater than you. She'ata ra'ita pnei Shechina v'kuru einecha. Sure, you saw the Shechina, but you went dim from the experience. Your eyes dimmed from the experience. You couldn't handle it. Minayin dichtivati vayiki tzeken Yitzchak etchen emarot. Ma mirot b'Shechina, that he saw the Shechina. Aval ani hayiti medaber Shechina panim panim. V'lo koine. Every day I was talking to Shechina, no problem. My eyesight was perfect. How do I know? Shneimar Moshe le'edak ki karan or panav. Okay, so the idea here is that
Moshe won.
Moshe won the argument.
Battles of history.
It's and the Midrash goes on. I cut it short, but it has Avraham, Yaakov. It's a whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, can you do Aaron?
Yeah. No, Moshe doesn't argue with Aaron. He argues with the Avot. But the point here is that here we see Yitzchak going blind is not from the angel's tears, but from seeing the
Tell me
Shekhinah.
Abraham.
Okay. I'll tell you about it after. Okay.
Yaakov.
All right.
Yaakov.
The next source explains a bit more about that. דבר אחר, בשעה שנעקד על גבי המזבח, תלה עיניו במרום והביט בשכינה. Okay, he saw the שכינה. מושלים אותו משל, למה הדבר דומה? למלך שהיה מטייל בפתח פלטין שלו. There was a king who was walking around at the entrance of his palace. We'll see from the continuation that's meant to be a private area that nobody looks into. וראה הבן שלו אהבו מציץ עליו בעד החלון. And the son of someone he respected and loved was looking at him and saw him from the window. Amar, imani oregoto. So if I killed the son because he violated the privacy of the king, right? Obviously I'll upset my friend. Rather, I'll board up the window so that he can't, glance at me. So, kach b'shah shenekad. So when Yitzchak Avinu glanced at the Shechina during the Akedah, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Im ani oreg oto, so if I kill Yitzchak now, Areini machir et Avraham, I'll upset Avraham, or Avai. Ela gozreni shichonu, rather I'll close the windows, in other words, the eyes that Yitzchak used to see the Shechina, I'll board them up. Okay, and that's why he went blind. V'hibid b'chvod HaShechina. V'hibid b'chvod HaShechina, and then the Midrash asks a question, did Yitzchak really look at Hashem? V'aktiv kilo yan adam b'chai. Right? Doesn't it say that no one can see Hashem and live? From the overwhelming experience, it's too much for a mortal to withstand. So I like this a lot, right? There's this halachic idea that a blind person is considered as though he were dead. And it's brought up in various sugyas. So we have a proof from this, that Yitzchak Avinu is considered as though he was dead because he saw the Shekhinah, but he went blind in his old age, and that was considered like as though he was dead. Okay, so here we have a different approach, which is that the reason Yitzchak went blind was because of the Akedah, either the angels or the Shekhinah or something, but something about the Akedah affected him in his old age. Like Yonah said earlier, you couldn't understand it as some Chazal trying to, impose upon Yitzchak a trauma from an earlier point in his life. Okay, a couple of more explanations, and then I want to tie it all together with the Chiddush at the end. So Amar Esav v'natar mibnot Kenan v'hayu nashav me'ashnot u'mekatrot avodah zara shelahem v'nistzaka imena shechina mitzchak. Rashi brings this in his commentary on the Chumash that the reason why Yitzchak went blind was because Esav had married these bnot Kenan and they worshipped avodah zara and they used to offer incense and they had smoke in the house and that smoke caused the Shekhinah to leave Yitzchak, and v'haya ro'eh Yitzchak u'mitzer, amar kadosh baruch hu, ha'eni meche et einav, shelo yirev Yosef tzar, lefichach vatichena einav. So I actually always thought that the smoke bothered his eyes and made him blind in his old age, like it irritated him. But what it's saying here is that Hashem said, as a chesed to Yitzchak, for the fact that there's constantly avodah zarah in the house, I'm going to blind him so he doesn't have to see it and be pained by the avodah zarah all the time. Okay?
So that's the reason if you istakel al rasha, you get blind, so you won't get.
So good. So that's another way to understand it, right? It's to protect you from falling further in.
Sounds very Haredi kind of.
אל תסתכל.
אל תסתכל. Amar B'Yossi Rabbi Simon. Okay, this is the Midrash. Okay, so now we're getting to later Midrashim, and that's important. Later chronologically. In other words, that these were composed not in the time of Breshit Rabbah, which was around the 3rd century CE, between the Mishnah and the Gemara, but these are Midrashim that are from the time of the Geonim. Okay, so Amar B'Yossi Rabbi Simon. Avram Avinu tava zikna. Okay, so each of the Avot demanded something from Hashem, something bad, and they had a reason for it. So Avram Avinu demanded old age. Amar lefanav ribono shel olam, av uben yu nichnasim b'makom ve'en adam yodea lemי mechabed al torato v'zikna. So since everybody, so Avram Avinu says, right, if a father and a son come, so if people don't age, but they always look the same, so no one will know who's the father, who's the son. Kedei lavin ben av leben. It's important to be able to differentiate between the generations. So Amar lo kadosh baruch hu chayecha davar tov tavatam mimcha ani matchil. So it's a good point. I'll start with you. Dichtiv Avram zaken bayamim. So Avram was the first person to ever age, okay, and become old-looking. Yitzchak Avinu tava yisurin. Yitzchak Avinu demanded suffering and affliction. Amar lefanav ribono shel olam, adam met belo yisurin, midat hadin metucha kenegdo. Right? Yitzchak said, if there's no yisurin in the world, then when a person dies, then he has no leverage. He's totally exposed to midat hadin in olam haba. Right? There's nothing that could protect him from, an eternal decree of punishment. So mitoch she'ata mevi alav yisurin. But if you punish him in this world, mit markin avonotav, you can cleanse his sins and give him reward in the next world. Amalei kadosh baruch hu, aya ata tchila. Okay, I will start with you. Dichtiv vayiki zaken Yitzchak vatichena einav mirot. So here we see that Yitzchak's blindness is meant to be not because of a sin, not because he was justifying Esau's wickedness and taking bribes, not because he was on the Akedah and the angel's tears fell into his eyes, not because of a curse from Avimelech, but just because sometimes tzaddikim are punished in order to cleanse them so that they can inherit Olam Haba. And that applies even to the Avot like Yitzchak Avinu. Okay, and just to finish this midrash, Yaakov tava choli, Yaakov Avinu demanded sickness. Amar lefanav, ribono shel olam, adam met belo choli ve'eno mechashev et banav. Right? Before Yaakov Avinu, people just one day, they died. That was it. They got to a certain age and then they dropped dead. They expired. Good, thank you. Gavav vayamot, right, they expired. So he says, a person doesn't have time to plan his inheritance to his children because he's just going along his merry way and then he passes away. So he should have time to, put his last will and testament together. Mitoch shu choleh shnayim u'shlosha yamim hu meyashev b'dato. Brachot? No, this is Midrash Lekach Tov. Mitoch shu choleh shnayim u'shlosha yamim hu meyashev b'dato u'mechashev et banav. So if he's sick for a couple of days, then he can get, okay, I gotta get my act together and think about my inheritance. Amar lo kadosh baruch hu, aya ata tchila. Okay, so we'll start with you. Hadu dichtiv, vayomer Yosef, hine avicha choleh, right? Yosef goes to Yaakov, and Yaakov gives the brachot, etc., etc. Okay? So we see here another explanation for Yitzchak's blindness, which is just to cleanse him from sin. Okay. Now, to conclude, I want to go down the following route, which is that first I'll read the Midrash, then we'll try to explain it. Okay, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, which is like I said, it's from the times of the Geonim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kevan shehigia hacherev al tzavaro. So we're going back to the story of the Akedah. Parcha v'yatz'a nafsho shel Yitzchak. Okay, so Yitzchak sees the blade of Avraham by his neck, and he dies. The kevanchi from fear. What? He was afraid. He was so.
He's like, oh, you thought you were going to get schar for killing him, thinking like, hey, no,
right.
Dying first.
Right. The kevanchi shmiya kolo miben akrovim.
Who was scared of who?
Avraham
He
Avinu,
was scared, but
not necessarily scared. For whatever reason, he passed away. וכיוון שהשמיע קולו מבין הקרובים, but then the voice came out from between the kruvim, whatever that means. ואמר לו, אל תשלח ידך אלא נער ואל תעש לו מהומה. In other words, Hashem said, don't harm the boy. נפשו חזרה לגופו. Right? Yitzchak was revived. וקם ועמד יצחק על רגליו. He came back to life. וידע יצחק שככה מתים עתידים להחיות. And Yitzchak understood that this was also how תחיית המתים would happen in the future. הוא פתח ואמר, and that's why he said, ברוך אתה השם מחיי המתים, like from the Amidah. So what is being said here that hasn't been said before? That at the Akedah, Yitzchak actually died and came back to life and was revived.
Who died? Why? Why?
Yes. Which goes against the Pshat, right? If you look at the Ibn Ezra, skip the Shibboleth Eket for a second. Ibn Ezra in his commentary on the Pasuk says, Ve'omer sheshachto ve'azvo. So anyone who says that Yitzchak was slaughtered and then Avram just left him there, ve'achar kachaya, and then he came back to life and was revived, Amar yafecha katuv, right? It's very clear that that's not the pshat of the story. The pshat is that he almost was about to die, and then Hashem stopped it from happening. But according to this midrash, Yitzchak actually died.
He says the pasuk Vayashav Avraham. So where's Yitzchak?
Right, Yitzchak isn't there anymore.
So he's saying he came back. Don't.
Yeah, right. The pshat is, where did Yitzchak go? Everybody asks that, right? Going back to the idea of the trauma, right? If Yitzchak was traumatized, right? If you think your father's going to come tie you up on an altar and almost kill you, you're probably not going to want to go back home with him, right? Yeah. So maybe they parted ways, which is a whole topic in and of itself. But the point here is that Yitzchak actually died. And if we look at the Shibboleth Eket, which was a bit of a later compilation, so he has a Rishon who has a work on the halachot of tefillah. So he says, Matzati Agada, I found a midrash. Mai al הסדר, זה סדר עולם, שכך מציין י"ח ברכות של תפילה. מעולם היו מתוקנות זו אחר זו. So he's coming to explain why the Shemona Esrei is in the order that it's in. Okay? So, כיוון שבו אנשי כנסת הגדולה, קיללו ותיקנו כסדרן. Okay, the אנשי כנסת הגדולה came and ordered the 18 brachot of the Amidah. Why did they do it in the order they did it? It's in the order of the figures of Tanakh. It starts with Avraham Avinu. Kishenitol Avraham Mior Kasdim, right? Avraham Avinu was saved. Patchu Malachei Hasharet ve'amru Baruch Ata Hashem Magen Avraham. The first bracha in the Amidah is the one who protects Avraham Avinu. So it's because Avraham Avinu was protected from Ur Kasdim. The second bracha is Mechayei Metim. What is that parallel? Yitzchak. Kishenekad Yitzchak Avinu al Gav HaMizbeach v'nasa deshen, that he was on the altar and he was turned into ashes. Ve'aya afro mushlach al har Moriah, and the ashes of Yitzchak were scattered upon the mountain. Miyad hevi alav HaKadosh Baruch Hu tal ve'hecheya oto. Hashem brought dew and revived him. Lefichach amar David ketal chermon shered al harei Tzion. There's a pasuk, I think in Tehillim, that there's like the dew on the chermon that descends onto the mountains of Tzion, and so similar. So there's this idea that the dew descended and revived Yitzchak, but the imagery here is way more intense than the imagery from Pikad Rabbi Eliezer. The ashes of Yitzchak were scattered. It's not just that his soul left him, and maybe he was lying there dead for a fraction of a second, and then he was revived, but he was completely gone. Right? Miyad patchu malachei hasheret ve'amru baruch ata Hashem mechayei metim. All right? And then uksheba Yaakov Avinu paga b'sharei shamayim v'ikdish shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then Yaakov Avinu, right, he has the dream with the ladder and all that. So amru patchu malachei hasheret ve'amru baruch ata Hashem hakel HaKadosh. Right? So it goes and explains the order of the things. Okay? So it's the point here is that we have this imagery of Yitzchak like literally being the actual korban and his ashes being scattered and him being revived by Hashem afterwards. So what's motivating? And these midrashim are later. So there's a whole kind of theory that's developed. I think Rav Bick writes about it in the Sefer from the Gut, but it's an idea that basically in the early days of the Rishonim, Jews started being persecuted, like in the Crusades, where there were pogroms, and Jews were offered a lot of times the option of litgaer or lamut. Right? You either need to convert or you need to die. And so there were shilas about what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to die al Kiddush Hashem? Or are you supposed to convert and this and that? And so Yitzchak Avinu gets turned into, in these midrashim, a martyr. In other words, somebody who dies al Kiddush Hashem and gets revived. That the earlier idea of Yitzchak being almost killed but not quite killed, it's almost this promise that you will be like Yitzchak Avinu if you follow that path of being someone who gets slaughtered al gabei mizbeach. Then eventually you'll be revived b'tchiat hametim. And so he's taken as kind of this source of hope that perhaps the Yudim who lived through really hard times in a certain period could look to for inspiration. So that's kind of one idea that's developed in terms of how this particular midrash develops over time. And just to conclude a thought I had, which ties it all kind of together. If we look at this example in the Shibbolei Aleket of how Yitzchak gets revived, so how does Yitzchak get revived? He gets revived with tal, with dew. Okay, it brings his ashes back together and brings him back to life. So we saw earlier, also in the Akedah, that the much earlier version of this midrash was, why did Yitzchak Avinu go blind later in life? Because the angels cried into his eyes, and that there was some effect from the angel's tears that led his eyes to be dimmed in old age. And we tried to understand that might be his willingness to go, showing his willingness to go and be sacrificed, and how admirable that is. That was the point you made, Kobe. And then also your point about how it maybe shows that there was some lasting effect to the Akedah that Yitzchak carried with him through the end of his life. So perhaps you could interpret the dew here in this version of the Midrash that's much later, saying a similar idea, that Yitzchak Avinu, he came back to life. He was revived through this dew on the Ketal Chermon Shored HaEtzion, that it takes both of those points that are being made by the early Midrash, but it emphasizes them Kal V'chomer, even stronger. Both that Yitzchak was a willing participant in the Akedah, because not just that he was lying there and the angels cried to him, but that he actually was killed. And he was killed and he was brought back to life. It shows the ultimate sacrifice that Yitzchak Avinu made al Kiddush Hashem. And the idea that he was revived from having been brought back from the dead. You can imagine that that's also something that a person doesn't forget easily. So the dew also, even though this Midrash does not say that the dew here is what led to Yitzchak Avinu being blind later in life, perhaps we can make that connection similar to how the angel's tears blinded Yitzchak later in life. To show that there was a lasting effect, even of the fact that he was eventually brought back to life, that it was still something that he carried with him into his old age. So,
Interesting stuff.
all right. Anyone who wants to go to the hawk over there, I guess?
Wait a second, David mentioned the song.